Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right. Good morning. Thanks for joining us at Michigan House. First of all, my name's Matt Lewis. I'm with the New Economy Initiative. This is our second year partnering with Michigan House, and it's great to see it evolve again. Always for the better. So thanks for joining us. I'd like to thank, in particular, Joe Voss and the Creative Many crew for making sure that all of us who are on stage got here. So please, let's have a round of applause for them. And then, of course, the Middle West crew who do a great job setting up and running this event seamlessly. So thanks to them, Ted and the team. So I'm with the New Economy Initiative. We're a project of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. So we're a philanthropic entity that's funded by 13 foundations, and our mission is to build an inclusive culture of entrepreneurship in Detroit and Southeast Michigan. I'd like to talk very little about us and get over to our panel here. And I'll briefly introduce them. We have Jackson Koeppel of Soulardarity. Yeah. I'll let them all tell you what they do in just a second. Diana Nucera of the Detroit Community Technology Project. Zeke Harris of MACC Development. And Shu Harris, no relation, of the Avalon Village. All right, so I'm going to start off this panel here by asking each of our panelists to briefly tell you about what it is they do. Let's back up for a second. This panel is called Big City Problems, Neighborhood Solutions. And what I think unites everyone on stage here is that they are tackling big problems that are not unique to Detroit and Highland Park and places in Michigan, but really in many cities around the country and world. And they're, through incremental change, are creating solutions that we really think can be taken other places through one internet connection at a time, one solar-powered streetlight at a time, one community gathering space at a time, one vacant lot transformed at a time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I think let's start with Shu to tell us about what the Avalon Village is and what's really the problem that you guys are addressing.
Okay, peace and love. It's really wonderful to be here today. I love this weather. This is good. Thank you, Texas. So my name is Shu. They call me Mama Shu. And basically what we did was to tackle the blight and to tackle the things that were not in our city, which I live in Highland Park, Michigan, which is a small city inside of Detroit. It's about 2.9 miles. And so I started a village. It's an eco-village, and basically I purchased like 30 pieces of land. I owned the whole block, about 31 pieces of land, and we started to build on it. The homework house, we building things out of shipping containers with solar energy as well as geothermal heating and cooling. And basically just turning blight into beauty on that particular block, addressing the issue of blight, the issue of not having the things that normal cities or regular cities would have, like lights and like things that are clean and nice and neat and wonderful places for children to learn, grow, and play, and for adults to just be able to enjoy. Also, that includes gardens and all of that. So that's what we're working on. We've just decided to basically put the power back in us, which that's what it was taking. It just took over a block, and that's what we did, because that's how we do in Detroit. Peace.
Wonderful. All right, Zeke, in that spirit of succinctness, please tell us all about MACC Development.
How you doing? My name is Ezekiel Harris, Executive Director of MACC Development. We're a local community development corporation focused on the Lower East Side of Detroit, 48214 zip code specifically. And we're actually in the process of, we just launched our new business, which is going to be, which is called The Commons, and it's a coffee shop and laundromat. Coffee shop and laundromat. They're actually one singular business. With the hope of bringing our entire community together. We operate right on Mack Avenue, which in a lot of ways is similar to 8 Mile in Detroit. I'm sure people have heard of the movie 8 Mile. But what happens along Mac Avenue and what has traditionally been the case is it serves as a divide between our multiple communities, in which you traditionally have the poor, African American working class on one side, and the more elite, bigger homes, mansions on the other side. And what we're trying to do is we're actually centered right on the core of that. We're trying to create spaces and ways in which our community can get together. We also operate sports leagues, we do literacy, we do housing, we do legal, but the Commons is kind of our biggest project as of yet, which I'll talk more about.
Diane?
Excellent. I also really appreciate this weather. And so I'm Diana Nucera. I'm the director of the Detroit Community Technology Project. And we have a couple pieces of work that we do. We work with understanding data and its influence on lower income and marginalized communities, as well as doing wireless networking with communities in Detroit to address the lack of access. And our work is really based in this idea of community technology, which is really doing building and using technology that is rooted in community need, that strengthens our relationships with each other and also the planet.
All right, Jackson.
Cool. My name is Jackson Koeppel, and about 5 years ago, I helped to found Soulardarity. We're based in Highland Park, Michigan, right down the street from SHU, and our mission is building energy democracy, based out of Highland Park and throughout Michigan and all of our neighboring communities. At the basis, that means an energy system where the people impacted by decisions about energy are actually at the table making those decisions. And the starting point for this was that in 2011, Highland Park had most of our streetlights repossessed by our friendly local utility, DTE. And we started organizing around community-owned solar-powered street lighting, and have moved from there into talking about policy that supports community-owned clean energy, community development that supports things like what Shu and Zeke and Diana are doing, and overall building an energy system that actually addresses impacts in the community and is led by the people that are going to feel those impacts.
Thanks, Jackson. Yeah, applause always welcome. Like Seth said in the last panel, we need it. So, Jackson, on that last note, you're talking about how you organize community around a cause. Can you talk a little bit about your community engagement process? And I think invite all the panelists to chime in about theirs as well after you get us started.
Sure. So Soulardarity started before we were an organization. We were just like trying to raise a few $1,000s to put up a solar streetlight. After the streetlight repossession, we were like, hang on, we think solar is a better idea for how we can do this. Let's run a fundraising campaign, put a video together, and get the first solar streetlight in Highland Park installed. And that turned out to generate enough energy that people started coming together and talking about it. I think what our community engagement has looked like as it's evolved is building up a really member-led and member-directed organization. So our mission is energy democracy, and our board is democratic as well. Folks are elected, they come from the community, right? Our board must be 6/9 Highland Parkers. And we do a lot of door-to-door work. We do a lot of kind of community-based projects, like finding we need to put up a solar light to keep this whole vision going. Let's work with Shu to do our second one to make sure that it's actually tied into this bigger vision of community development. And especially in Highland Park, which is a really small city, and a city that has a lot of seniors and a lot of working families, we really need to be doing a lot of door-to-door work and a lot of really consistent events and conversations to make sure that whatever vision we're advancing when we're in spaces like this, connecting and building with people, that we have a clear and updated sense of here's what the robust range of opinions and ideas in the community is, and that we're honoring all of that complexity as we do the work. more I could say, but I think I'll pass it off to y'all to speak a little bit about your work.
Yeah, yeah. I think community engagement can be made complicated, but in a lot of ways, it's simply being human and actually talking to people and getting their opinions on different things that you're trying to do. And so, when the benefit of and what drew me to MACC development is the fact that actually 90% of our board lives in our zip code, 80% of our staff lives in our zip code, and 75% of everyone I just mentioned actually owns their homes, right? So we have this kind of long-term investment in what happens in our community. So it becomes much easier to then ask for feedback, then try to do projects, and go about engaging our community because we are part of that community. As we went on the planning process for the Commons, when we were thinking about, okay, we have this MACC Avenue corridor, we actually have this huge 8-foot picture of what MACC Avenue used to look like back in 1963, and it's just business on top of business on top of business on top of a business. Back in the 60s, they didn't believe in green space as much as we do today. And so we went about the process of actually kind of dreaming up with our community, hey, what could this corridor be again? And one of the things that we realized was after going through the planning process and kind of identifying what were some of the key things that people wanted, we also realized that we didn't want to be one of those nonprofits who just created a plan and just created a plan. But we wanted to do something about it. And so we took a step forward and said, hey, actually, we've created this plan and we want to be the first ones in. And so as we started having conversations about, hey, what business would you like to see in our community? We had a bunch of different ideas kind of come up. And two ones that kind of rose to the surface were a coffee shop and a laundromat. And then I don't know who had the bright idea, but somebody was like, hey, why don't you combine them together? Like, yes, let's do that. But what's cool is the coffee shop aspect of it is we've got one coffee shop kind of in our area, and I tried walking to it from my house. It took about 30 minutes. And so as I thought about, like, man, people in our community aren't going to walk to this coffee shop. They're going to go to their local gas station, right? And so there wasn't a really good space to gather. It was kind of small, not really kind of community-based. Don't see a lot of people from my neighborhood necessarily going there. And then the other piece was this laundromat. There's not a laundromat within 3 miles of our building. And so what that means is people have to get on the bus, they have to take their dirty laundry, and not have this kind of like dignified experience in doing so. And so for us, it made community sense, but it also made a business sense to be able to do something like that. I think one of the mysteries of that happens in our neighborhood, or one of the things that I don't agree with, is that businesses can't thrive in all Detroit neighborhoods. I think it's just really finding that unique value proposition that you can bring, and then doing it alongside your community. It's taken us a long time to bring our business online, but what's happened over and over and over again is you have those folks who are just like, man, keep going, because we know you planned this whole thing with us, and it's for us. So anything that you go through, we're going to be there.
Great. Diane, you want to? Oh, shoot.
Yeah, I do have something to say about community engagement. So what I did was that I engaged myself into the community. I lived on Rhode Island Street. I was actually born in Highland Park. And so I saw this block, Avalon Street, and I used to look at it like, wow, I want to go over there and build my village. Years and years passed. I had a kid, a 2-year-old. He got killed. He got hit on Avalon Street, not Avalon Street, but Rhode Island. 6 months after he died, the space and the block that I was looking at became available, the house that I looked at, and I said, I want to put my nonprofit there, and then I'm going to go over there and live there and fix up that whole block. It took me 8 years. I did one block at a time, basically. The community engagement came when I dealt with people that folks wouldn't mess with. And if I was sitting on my porch, I would use another word. People like the people that was in the halfway houses and things like that. A lot of the men that came from Detroit Rescue Mission, they helped me to clean those lots out. 27 years I worked in the school system, Detroit school system, as well as charter school system, the children that I had, I brought them over and said, hey, we're doing this over here. We're going to have a park. We're going to do this. We're building a park for my son. We're going to make a homework house and everything. So I got them involved. So the community engagement part was a little piece at a time. It grew. And what we did is that we made ourselves present with different activities and different things that we were doing. And what happened is that the place became sacred and nobody wanted to touch it and do anything wrong to it. So even the guys from the rescue mission, which I told you, those are the ones that you don't want to mess with, they made sure that no trash, none of that stuff was thrown around. That lady's over there cleaning up, leave her alone, don't mess up. And so it became that. So they became respectful of the space. And so there was no more blight on that particular block as well as around it. So we took care of even the Woodward areas. So we got the community engaged, and so when we decided to, I said, okay, I'm gonna build this village. We gonna do it, we gonna do it. We did a Kickstarter. I had, a foundation, the Big Sun Foundation, and they gave us a donation, seed money to actually start. And then what we did was we did a Kickstarter campaign. And so I had a goal of 241.9, and we actually raised 243,691 in 30 days. That right there, yeah.
That's 200.
That's 200, not 200, it's 200. And 43,691. And that right there initiated cleaning up the block, initiated building up the homework house in which we invited the students, as well as the men and the women from the halfway houses and things around the city, the neighbors of Highland Park. Everybody was so happy that that particular block, which was one of the most blighted and one of the most quote unquote dangerous blocks back in the day. My police chief, I'm an officer too and a chaplain for the police department as well for Highland Park, and my police chief said, Harris, you know, that block right there that you're working on was one of the baddest blocks. The police used to be over there 6-7 times a day and all of that, which really made it wonderful because it's a phoenix rising. If you saw this block, it was mattresses and everything, but we actually saw beyond that. So the community has been wonderful and engaged, but one of the things that you have to be there, you have to be doing it yourself, and you have to cling to it, and you can't be nowhere else doing something on your block. You almost gotta feel the love of the people and everything that you're working with. And so that's one of the things that we did, and they're engaged every day, and they're loving the project because it's a bright spot in what we're doing. Jackson has which he didn't say, I was co-director with him. I love him. We've been working together, building and just doing stuff and getting in trouble and everything together, and I love it.
Yeah, and I think at the core of what I hear both of you saying is that what is at the core of community engagement is relationship building. And so if you're not within that community, then I think either as a nonprofit or technologist or as a leader, it's all about facilitating those relationships. And so for us, if we're working with 3 different neighborhoods right now to build their own community wireless networks called the Equitable Internet Initiative, a lot of people get really excited about the tech, but really what is at the core of this community engagement is education and relationship building. And I like to call it facilitative leadership. And so the idea about facilitative leadership is that you're not the one leading the projects, but you're, I don't want to say empowering, but you're giving the knowledge needed for someone to understand and point out what the problem is and then do problem solving with their community in order to fix that problem, because there is no blanket solution that actually works. Around all these communities. Like your community in Highland Park is so different than my community in Southwest Detroit. I mean, we even speak different languages, you know? So we can't expect that we are building things and doing an engagement in a blanket sort of way. So I'd like to encourage folks to really think about community engagement as a way of building leadership, as a way of understanding what the multiplicities of the problems are, what the complexities of the problems are, and then using that to then bond people together to then sort of think through how you use the resources that you have in order to solve those problems.
Can I just tag one thing on, which is that I just experience it a lot of the time, like people don't actually regard that work as work. Like it's like years and hours and huge amounts of labor to do that stuff the right way. And I think especially nonprofits and especially community nonprofits are like, we're sort of expected to do all that work pro bono and basically like
Where people are like, hey, can you do the community engagement for us?
yeah, can you do the engagement for us? Like, you do that all the time, right? It doesn't take any of your hours, and you don't have to go make money somewhere else. And so, like, I think there's like expectation that that all this stuff isn't as grueling and difficult and complicated as it is. Because like it's not like you talk to one person in the community and it's like, all right, now we know what the community thinks. Like, folks disagree. Like, there's a lot of different opinions about what we should be doing with our time and what our priorities should be. And it's like, I think like what Diana said, negotiating and facilitating that process of building to consensus as a group about what our priorities are and what we're going to work on. It's a big lift, and like folks like y'all that are doing it.
And I know we're got a lot to talk about, but the thing with that, which I think is really interesting, is that we've been so conditioned in how to negotiate with each other, and so it's a very top-down model. So I think the thing that I always come across is being able to use tools like popular education that sort of remove this conditioning, so that you're actually, instead of posing an idea and saying, what do you think about it? Like, it's really actually new for people to come together to make decisions. And I think that's actually like a lot of the work that we have to do moving forward, is actually figuring out how to not even come to consensus, but how to be in a space where we can disagree but still respect and hold relationships.
So another question for all of you. Anyone can feel free to answer this, but well, actually, let me ask the audience really quick. Who here's from Detroit, Metro Detroit? All right. How about West Michigan? All right. Flint, Saginaw Bay City. All right. How about outside of Michigan? All right. Thank you for coming. So we got a lot of people who are interested in Detroit across the country and world, because Detroit is an iconic city for good and bad reasons. There are a lot of well-meaning people out there who want to be a part of what's happening in Detroit. But what do outsiders, for lack of a better term, people who are not of the community in Detroit, what do they get wrong about Detroit, and how can we direct their good intentions to further your projects or projects that are happening in Detroit?
I have a very strong opinion about this.
Give it right now.
Give us our space to do what we do. It takes a lot of work to bring people on board, especially if the work is intentional. Folks think, like, and especially with volunteering or anything like that, like, that is capacity that takes from us. Donations, supporting the work financially, is the best thing you can do. Because it really supports us in building up the people within the communities to do the work. And at least in my work, I'm all about the Detroiters doing it, not outsiders doing the work. And also, there's this sort of facade that's like, we're just trying to get you exposure and that's going to be great, without knowing like what that exposure does to the work and how much capacity it takes to actually deal with that exposure. Which I feel like I'm recently dealing with right now with our Equitable Internet Initiative. And so like there's this, I don't know, those are my opinions, is that like, let us do what we do, and when we need help, we'll ask you.
Yeah, so I agree on the financial donations are the best, especially unrestricted financial donations. No, because just on the donations, I've had to build my own muscle to be able to say no to people and the things that people want to donate, because sometimes things that people donate either have nothing to do with the mission, even though that's what they can donate, or don't necessarily reflect the quality that we're trying to bring into our space. Like we were looking for furniture donations for our building, and I had to say no to a lot of people because I was trying to. We had done quality throughout our entire facility, down to our business. We're trying to compete with every other coffee shop in Detroit and Metro Detroit, and I had to say no to a lot of people because I was like, no, it's just not there. It's close, but it's just not there. But When thinking about what people get wrong about Detroit, I think it's easy to drive around our neighborhoods, to see people on the streets, and to think that people don't care. If I've learned anything from living just around Detroit, being in Flint, is that people care so much we're having a huge tax foreclosure problem in Detroit, and there are hundreds of thousands of people each year fighting to keep their homes. But when you drive down, our church just bought a new building on Harding on the east side of Detroit, and the block is, there's a lot of fire damage, a lot of things going on. But when you drive down the blocks, you'll always see that one just original Detroiter who's holding down their entire block, investing in their house, keeping up their garden, maybe even cutting their neighbor's lawn because they care that much. And that's something that I think gets wrong. It's just wrong many times. Like people care so much, and that's why people are still here. Outside of all the new people moving in, there are people who have been here, who have seen the ups and downs, but have still chosen to stay. And I think that's something that's really important to remember as you come into any city that has its ups and that has its downs. Is that there are people here who care.
I think one thing I'll say too, I just want to double down on that support that, and both financial and time and energy that isn't restricted, right? That isn't we want to give you support to do this exact thing, because just to tie back to the community engagement piece, a lot of our work is iterative. It's we start solving a problem and we realize that we have to solve it a different way, or we realize the problem was actually different than the problem we initially set out to solve. And so that long-term and deep support to that problem-solving process is what allows communities to actually build leadership over time. And one of the things that always stands out to me that sometimes I hear in the narrative about Detroit is this downfall was inevitable and it's this just sort of unfortunate thing that happened, rather than this is the outcome of very specific policies that slated the city for demolition. To be frank, you don't have mass foreclosures and water shutoffs and development that doesn't actually support the people in Detroit, that isn't structurally designed to be that way. And I do want to share just one really story that has stood out for me as a great example of outside support. So Soulardarity funded and put up 6 solar lights in this kind of funding them and putting them up on a block-by-block basis, working with our members on those blocks to figure out how to sustain the cost and everything. But we realized at a certain point, through, again, this research, iterative community work, that if we wanted to do solar lighting and fully relight the city, we needed a citywide proposal. And we connected with a group called the Southeast Michigan Regional Energy Office, which had been helping doing technical support to cities all over Southeast Michigan to switch over to energy-efficient LED streetlights. And we basically reached out to them because they'd been doing this work, and we were like, look, we know that we need to do a municipal proposal. We don't know anything about bonding. We don't have the legal, technical expertise to design the kind of thing we want. We know what we want, but we don't have all of the kinds of expertise we need to design it. And I'll just shout out directly Rick Bunch, who was the executive director at the time, basically came and worked with us and said yeah, y'all are driving the ship. I have all these technical resources and knowledge. Help me figure out how to design something that works for y'all. And we came out with this Let There Be Light proposal to finance 1,000 solar streetlights in the city. And I really turned to that as a great example of there is technical expertise and knowledge that we want supporting our work, but really creating trusting and deep dynamics where we can put that stuff to work in service of a community-built vision. And so I really think that's an important piece too, engaging in, if you're I have knowledge and abilities that I think are really helpful, and building the long-term relationships where they can be used accountably in service of this community popular education and problem-solving process.
And just quickly to add to that is just to remember that Detroiters are so smart and so resilient and have all the skills they need to rebuild the city. And that oftentimes they're looked past because of either the poverty or the structural racism that deeply exists within that city and within the United States. And so, like, I'm just really proud to, like, be on this panel with folks that are an example of that for you all. But also know that, you know, when I go home, I've got, like, 96 or some, like, digital stewards that have been trained that can run circles around the wireless engineers at this conference, and that they all live and are from Detroit and some of them did not even finish high school. And so let's just keep in mind that Detroit is actually a very smart and resilient city.
Diane, can you tell us a little bit about that Digital Stewards program and who those people are and how they've identified themselves to you and you've embraced them?
Sure. So yeah, at the heart of the work we do is education, and I think the way in which we're going to sort of transform the tech world, or even the issues that we have, is through education. And so the digital stewards are folks within the neighborhoods that learn how to build, maintain, and organize wireless networks. Like I said, a lot of them didn't finish high school, and sometimes their graduation that we have is their first graduation they've ever had. And sure, that's like a heartstring story in itself, but what's a really important thing to know is that these folks had a vision for their neighborhood. They just needed the tools and the knowledge in which to bring that vision to life. And so that's what we do. Like, I'm an educator. I'm not a wireless engineer. I'm not a techie, even though, like, I go by Mother Cyborg. I'm in my other life, but only because I teach so many people technology. And really what it's all about bringing the resources to the neighborhoods to say, hey, what do you want to learn? Giving them what they need to know in order to adapt it. So we have this sort of theory of change that if you're able to sort of tell your own story, then you move from being the victim into the protagonist of that story. And that with the Digital Stewards program, we have we've trained 96 folks, 30 some of them are active. We have a slew of folks in New York that we've been working with the Resilient Communities group in New York, and it's sort of been the education model has been going around. And just to keep in mind that it is not about the tech, it is about the education, and that popular education is at the heart of that, which means that you are working with people's issues and them being able to identify how they themselves need to be empowered, rather than coming into a space and saying, this is how I'm going to empower you.
Thank you. So we're a little over half an hour in, and I want to leave plenty of time for your questions, but very quickly, before we conclude me talking, I would like to ask our panel, and I'm sorry because I didn't ask you this in advance, because I just came up with it because you guys inspired me to. But in one generation's time, I think, so politically we don't think beyond election cycles. We have a hard time thinking beyond our immediate needs and problems. In one generation, so let's say 20 years, what is the Avalon Village, MACC Commons, Equitable Internet Initiative, and Soulardarity, what have they accomplished? What do you see? What's your vision for that next generation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in 20 years, you actually walk out of the Commons and you hear children playing, you hear music going on next door, and you actually see a slew of businesses along MACC Avenue. The MACC development sign is actually taken down from our building because MACC development has actually achieved its mission. And the Commons is actually still a community-based, community-led, resident-led for-profit business that's thriving, but the story is that it was the spark of other things that happened in our neighborhood. Our sports league is still happening at the park down the street, but again, it's been taken over by residents to lead that. Same thing with literacy. Now it's just more of a daycare center because there's no longer the problem of literacy in our area, but that has also been solved. So for me, the vision is that we actually, and this is what hurts me the most, is when thinking about nonprofits, I was always told like, hey, we're trying to work our way out of a job, right? We're trying to work our way out of a job. But through my experience, I've been at a $60 million organization whose whole purpose and goal is to they call it, they're supposed to be a social change agent, but there wasn't very much change happening that I saw, and that's actually what drew me to MACC development. But I think if more nonprofits had the idea that, hey, we're actually trying to allow others to take something on and actually solve some really specific things, I think we would be in a much better place than we are.
I'd like to say that Avalon Village will basically, it was created to be infectious. It was basically created to show folks that you can improve your conditions without waiting on anybody, waiting on the big check from the folks that got the big money. You can pull together in your own neighborhoods and actually do it. So 20 years later, all of the Avalon blocks will be done, as well as other neighborhoods from other parts of the country and other places will at least see, hey, we can do this with the blighted land. Even if you only start from one vacant lot at a time, in which that's what we did. You can see that, and it's basically, it's a movement. It's a movement of spirit. People have to know that you have this inside of you. People have to know that you can do something without having anything. If you looked at the land that we started with, and probably some of the stories that you've seen, the ones that don't live in Detroit or have never been, and maybe what the media has showed you, has been some raggedy looking stuff, which is unfair. It's beautiful jewels all around the city of Detroit, and it's people who are creative that are making things happen. So my first thing is that we have to create something that actually be a demonstration of, okay, here's how you can do this without, with the shoestring budget. I mean, I sold fish sandwiches for $5. I mean, literally packed my money inside of a coffee can and saved it. I mean, this is what we did. I used my own check to start things, my income tax check every single year. I mean, you know, we balled out and we bought things or whatever for the village. That's what we did. It's from you. It's the power. The people have to know that they have the power, no matter how the situation looks. And so that's what I have to say. We built it to be infectious and to be a demonstration on what could actually happen. It doesn't have to be exactly that, but it could be something like that to better your conditions and to not wait on anybody to come save the day. You save the day in your own. You build your own beautiful world right there where you are. I could live anywhere probably, all outside of anywhere, but I love where I live, right there in my own neighborhood. And I believe that the neighborhoods are neglected. There's not a lot of energy coming in, but they're jewels. And if we just take charge of our own situation, and that's really what it's gonna take. We have to take charge of our own situation. We can do that and make better places for ourselves and our families.
So I want to build on that to say that in my mind, in a generation, that infectiousness has not just been about spreading between different neighborhoods and lots of different people taking power, but that the institutions that have for a long time been enforcing the conditions that put our neighborhoods in this position have actually themselves transformed as well, right? And that our local governments and our county governments and our foundations and philanthropies have acknowledged that the way we've been doing stuff isn't working for most people. And we actually have policies and regulations and programs that are supporting Avalon Village and 1,000 other Avalon villages to be popping up everywhere. Because, I mean, frankly, for better or worse, Highland Park and Detroit are places where a lot of things happen for the first time. Yeah. You know, Highland Park is the first mile of paved road in the US, the first depressed urban freeway, right? It's the site of the first automated auto manufacturing. And in a lot of ways, it's ground zero for the model of development that is now responsible for so many of the problems that are happening, right? And I think that the stuff that is happening in Detroit and Highland Park, you know, because it's kind of out ahead of what the rest of the world is experiencing in a lot of ways, we're also out ahead in figuring out how do we solve some of these huge problems. And what I hope for in the scope of a generation, I don't know where Soulardarity is going to be as an organization, but I hope that the need for us is diminished because our institutions have actually adopted this way of thinking and are starting to support this work without the need for us to be like, yelling about it at people.
20 years. It's like, was it 2040 something? Weird. So the vision I have is very specific. It's around the internet. And that I think the biggest problem we have right now is around affordability. So my dream is that these neighborhood networks that are emerging, they build businesses that are based in mutual aid, not on a bottom line, so that if you have to shut off, you're not in a position where you have to shut off someone's utility because they can't pay. I think that's something we're dealing with really intensely in Detroit and in Flint. I also think that in having these small businesses, and hopefully they will inspire others around the United States to do the same, and that will develop a new market for the internet that will bring costs down, and that will sort of give AT&T, Comcast, and Time Warner, or all these big companies, a sort of competition, so that they have to then act in better ways. I believe diversifying the market will do that. That the internet is demystified and that people know how it works, what it does, and are prepared for AI, and are very conscious about technology, and that the way in which we are working on the internet is based in consent. So not just when we talk about consent, I think we think about relationships and ending rape culture, and I think that is very a subject that we need to think about with technology. So, for instance, the gentleman that came up took a photo of us that maybe in 20 years they would ask first and tell us what they're going to do with it, and that we respect each other's data, and that we respect each other's images, and that something like fake news couldn't exist because of that.
All right. Now it's time for your questions. Does anybody have any questions for the panel?
So as you think about your work, there's this whole concept of psychology between the neighborhoods you're working with and then the systems you're working within. How do you go about changing mindsets so that your work can start to flourish and scale?
Yeah, that's been really interesting, that right there, what you just said. Can you just say it one more time so I can make sure that just one more time, please.
The whole concept of the mindset, like we've been conditioned for a long period of time to think a certain way about our neighborhoods and how our neighborhoods function and how we function within that neighborhood. A lot of times the people that are in your community right now have been conditioned to go outside of their community to get their resources, to get things that they want to do, to be a part of other communities because they've been told that it's better out there,
Yeah.
right? And what you're trying to do is build within. So how do you get them to change their mindsets to participate in what you're trying to do? Part of it is community engagement, and part of this is the step-by-step approach, but how do you go about changing those mindsets on that side? But then something that you said around going into the systems and then bringing them into it to believe into what the community can do.
Well, one of the things that I think that what we did was by example. And for me or whatever, I'm not getting ready to mess with nobody that don't want to mess with me. No, seriously, we don't have that kind of time in our neighborhoods. You know what I'm saying? They're just falling all apart and stuff. Whoever is in alignment with what it is that we're doing is fine with me. And then a lot of times when you have that example, then it's like, oh, that's going on, and then next thing you know it. So that's basically what happens, where they catch on or whatever after it's all beautiful and you've done all the work or whatever, and you know, all bloody and everything, and you just been fighting or whatever this. So I don't do that anymore to try to make somebody do something. You can't. You just let them see. And you just be. That's all it is. You just be. I'm not pulling no teeth. I'm not doing any of that. When you come over and you want to help, or you want to participate, number one, it has to be in alignment with what it is. No one can take anything over. It has to be straight up for the people. And so my thing is that straight be an example. So here's what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. I can't make you give me this to make this happen or whatever. Just do it and just be and create what it is that you're creating. And the world will see, and if they want to join in, they will. If they won't, they'll leave it alone. And the ones who are in tune with it, they'll come. The people who will help you to build or whatever, they will come, and they will be genuine, and you'll know that. That's just how I roll.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, I think that's actually incorrect. My director of community engagement, Edith, has lived in our neighborhood, has been a long-time resident in our neighborhood. And she continually reminds me that actually how our neighborhoods were built was that so people could shop locally. And it wasn't, people didn't always go out of their neighborhood to go to school or to go to the grocery store. A lot of those things were located in their own neighborhood. So I think in a lot of ways it's actually kind of reminding ourselves that that's actually how we used to operate, and then that actually worked really well. Doctors came to you, you didn't go to them, and all these things that we kind of miss nowadays, and we're wondering why we kind of have all these missed social interactions is because of that factor. So I think that's one of the reasons why we have a big picture of what MACC used to be, because we're trying to get back to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's an assumption that mindset exists, that people don't want it to happen, that they want to leave. And I think it's based in education. I really do. You can't talk about something you don't know about. You can't build something you don't know how to build. And so, like, the thing for me is that, like, it's within ownership. Like, when you can have when you can feel like you own your community, and that you're a part of it, is when you're going to stick around and do something. And I think that's when economic development happens. But in my theory of change, it's like you need knowledge to be able to then adapt. And then within that adaptation is when ownership occurs.
Yeah. Sorry, one more piece on that. And in terms of working within a bigger system, so 98% of my job is convincing people, right? Of trying to cast this vision, but also march towards it at the same time. And it's actually incredible. I always get joy from walking our neighbors through our building, but also walking city officials, urban planners, kind of all that. Because then they ask, like, hey, did you study real estate? Or did you study urban planning? I was like, no, I was a political science major, and kind of learned my way through this. But I think what's interesting is, like, in Detroit specifically, right now we have a lot of neighborhood planning that's going on by the city. And a lot of that is happening in some core neighborhoods that I would say have already seen investment and will already, like, it's kind of like easy, It's like, oh, you're gonna throw money where money already is. That's cool, I guess. But what we're trying to do, and I think what all of us are trying to do, is operate outside of those kind of pockets. And remember that, like, actually we're doing things that are really hard, and I think people in city governments look at nonprofits like ours to say, like, okay, how are they actually going about that? We bought our building for $500 in 2011, 12,000 square foot building, used to be a furniture warehouse. $500 when we walked inside, there was a bunch of furniture inside, so our church, which originally bought the building, gave some of it away, sold some of it, put some of it back up in storage, right? Then a couple years later, we've raised about, we're investing about $1.5 million back into that same building to start this business, to have it be our office space, have it be our literacy space, have it be our community space. And the biggest question I always get is, like, man, first, how did you do this? And then why did you do this? So for how, it's being able to cast that vision and show people that, hey, like, these people matter, and we can't cast them off on the side and say, like, hey, let's invest in downtown, and then it'll come out into the neighborhoods. But people don't have time to wait for that, right? And so the second part is why we're doing it. Because we're a Christian organization and we believe that people are made in the image of God, and people have this, the term is imago Dei. And so we want to be able to not only kind of serve their spiritual needs, but also serve their spiritual needs. And so when we have this kind of bigger picture of what we're trying to go forward, it makes it much easier to do something that's new, to do something that's different, to do something that's hard, and then bring those city officials on after.
I have a quick question, and I'm going to, for the sake of time, and I know other folks in the room may want to ask questions, I'm going to direct my question to you, Diana. And I want to, Marcus, I think that's what your name was, I want to pull the thread on the question that Marcus asked and ask you, Diana, to answer this question. And so when you start talking about systems change in terms of how you bring people in, one of the things that's really super important to do, what you just asked, is that we have to control our narrative. Words matter. Narrative matter. Who tells the story matters. And the reason why I'm going to ask you this question, Diane, is there are some words that I wrestle with. There's some words that I struggle with. And there's some words that I've heard you all use on the panel. And so I'm going to ask you, how do you wrestle with these words that matter so that people do feel that they are empowered? And those words that I heard on this panel used are words like minority. Detroit is a city that is 85% African American and 90% people of color. We are not minorities in the city of Detroit.
And the fourth largest
exactly.
African
And I've
American
heard
city.
words like marginalized. I've heard words like low income. So those words, those narratives, that language is negative within itself. And then I've also heard words like empower. So Diana, my question to you is, how do you wrestle with those types of words and make sure that black bodies and brown bodies aren't being exploited so that we can get support, right?
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, because it is the way in which we use our language that shapes the way we think. And I think even what the sad part is that even if black and brown folks are the majority of Detroit, they still are dealing with marginalized situations. And so I don't think that word is not applicable in this situation. And that the thing that we really want to talk about, right, is structural racism. And I think that people are just really uncomfortable to talk about that. And so I personally use those words because I think they're entry points into talking about structural racism. They're what people know. And the neighborhoods that we are working within are low income. And I mean, I don't use the word minority at all. But if it is, it's the sense that specifically within like women or women of color as leadership within specifically tech spaces. So I think what I hear you saying is that like, is the way in which we're using this word actually like causing transformation on the story itself. And I don't think sensationalizing struggle does the transformation. It is telling the story of the transformation that does that. And I think that's why people are so interested in our particular story, because they see black and brown folks on roofs building wireless networks, and they have never seen that before. And they've never seen a woman of color, and I'm a queer woman of color and very proud of it, sitting up here telling you something that you're really excited about. Do you know what I'm saying? So for me, what I struggle with is definitely being tokenized. I'm on a lot of panels where I'm the only woman, let alone the only person of color. I use those words to engage the audience in order to be able to talk about structural racism, and I'm not afraid to talk about it. And if you want to talk about it after this, let's do it. I'm also like very much an anarchist when it comes to the future and saying that everything should be decentralized and that systems of capitalism are the ones that are causing the major problems. And in the last panel, when our friends were talking about the water crisis, I'm thinking, wow, why are we even talking about bottled water when the problem is that why are we even drinking bottled water? You know, so anyways, you're getting me all pumped up and I appreciate you. And I know that's what you were trying to do. It worked. But I think the thing is that to me, the issue is that we need to be better about talking about racism. We need to be better about talking about structural racism in particular, and we need to be better about having those folks that are considered the low income and minority or whatever else in leadership positions to transform what those words actually mean.
All right. Got to try to get 2 more questions in.
Yeah, for myself personally, I don't like called being a minority in my own land. I mean, I prefer to be called a member of the former majority, and we can talk about how that isn't right now. A short poem: yellow, 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 black, 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 brown, brown, white. That's the world. Tell me who the minority is, okay? And then I think what I'm hearing and what we're dealing with and what you're dealing with also is that we have the static notion of governance or systems. They're not static. They're invested in letting you believe that, okay? The nation state as we know it is a new form of social governance. It's only been around the world for a couple, maybe 300 years, tops, out of hundreds of thousands of years of human existence. And you believe that's the end of the world, so to speak. The systems of governments that you deal with are not scaled to meet the needs of human people where they live. So the systems of government have to change. And I think we're all about that, but we can't give credence to the extant systems that exist. They existed for a reason to put, as you've said eloquently, to put us in this position. So to me, the human endeavor that we all live in, the art that we live, is how do you change those systems of governance that are out of proportion to the scale of human lives? And we're suffering the problems because they're looking at something else other than your life. They have a different set of concerns that are not who you are, where you live, and what you do. So we've got to, all of us as a human peoples, get out of those static notions of governance and get back into our own scale of, there's a natural scale of governance. Like when our people got too big in a city and we were arguing with each other, we didn't have democracy. The people that on the other half went across the river. They had their own thing over there, and we had our own thing over here. We had continuity. In democracy, you're always going to have 49% of the people pissed off, okay? And there's consensus building models of governance. And I just want to hear, because I'm hearing you guys talking about consensus systems of governance internally. So how do you bring that to the larger systems, is my question.
I can go in on the energy system for a minute. I don't know about restructuring all governance. That might take a couple of hours, but seeing as we're going deep, the way we do, and I can speak to energy systems because I think it's a good, zeroed in concrete example, right? When we started building energy infrastructure, and I'm going to say that we is probably not all inclusive of the whole we that's in this room. When people started building the energy infrastructure in this country, they're basically like, we need to get more money than was ever invested in anything ever before, invested in something to build out all these transmission lines and these plants and all this stuff. What they essentially said was, you select group of very wealthy people, you all invest the money in building that system and we're going to give you a monopoly, and you can sell power to people in this area forever and nobody gets to compete with you. And the way that has panned out for us now is that in Highland Park and in Detroit and in places around the country, we have a situation where companies that are owned and operated for the benefit of their shareholders, right, to make money for the people that are invested in them, are guaranteed the right to a certain amount of profit by the state, which, right, as the state conceives of itself, is supposed to be working in the benefit of the people that are buying the power. And so we have an institutional situation that is fundamentally at odds with human well-being. And this isn't the way we're always talking about it, right? Because sometimes it's more just about the street lights got taken out and we got to get lights back, and that's where we're going to start organizing. But at the bottom of this, we have to ask questions about the way the institutions that provide power to people are set up is fundamentally at odds with their well-being. And Shu and I agree that a lot of the times, you're gonna work with people and build stuff, but I'm also very down to go and knock heads of the Public Service Commission when it comes down to changing some of those rules and structures. And I think there are models of democratic governance in energy that are already showing up, right? You have cities that are voting to municipalize their energy supply and literally buy it back from the investor-owned utilities. You got folks starting energy co-ops around the country and building more democratic models of governance around the energy system. And that's just one piece of everything. I think there are similar models around internet, around community development, around housing. But I think we really have to look like sector by sector and like institution by institution about how we take them to the next level.
All right, one more question. You've been waiting a long time.
First, thanks for being here. I feel honored. I don't know anything about you guys before today, but I feel honored like hearing about your work and just really excited to be here, so thank you. So I'm from Texas and I live here in Austin. I used to live in DC, and one of the things that I've seen in the nonprofit communities in both of these places is that the important work that folks like yourselves have done in neighborhoods that for a very long time have been pushed to the margins are now on the negative end of gentrification and development. And I'm curious to know, how are you ensuring that the people you serve and the communities you serve, that they're not going to lose out on the work that you guys are laying the ground for, so that 20 years from now their kids aren't being pushed out and aren't allowed to live in those communities because of negative development?
I knew I liked him. Good question. Yeah, so I think in the community development space, I don't think people recognize how quickly changing like physical elements of our kind of cities can change neighborhoods. So one thing that we're really focused on is, hey, we're saying like, man, we're actually gonna be opening the first business on MACC Avenue in 50 years. And we know that that's huge. And we're also saying like, hey, if this business takes off like we think it will, there's gonna be some positive effects that happen, there's gonna be some negative effects that happen. So what are we gonna do about that? And that's essentially the question that we're asking ourselves. As part of our first step into that kind of unknown of what's going to happen, is we're actually taking a deep dive into housing specifically, and looking and we kind of put our housing on pause while we did the development. But now that it's done, we're actually going to be ramping that back up to look at how do we kind of create these mixed income communities. How do we make sure that people who are currently living in our communities, residents in our community, if they want to say that they're able, and for people who want to move into our neighborhoods, how do we also be welcoming to them at the same time? Because we know regardless, it's going to happen. But the biggest thing about gentrification is not recognizing that the people who have been fighting to hold on to their homes, or who do want to live in the neighborhoods, they kind of just get kind of pushed and pushed and pushed. And that's personally one of the biggest problems I have with a lot of the city-based planning that happens. People, and this is what I love about our neighborhood, is they're saying like, oh, great, you keep on talking about increasing our quality of life and bringing all these businesses in here, blah, blah, blah. That's cool, but we recognize that's not going to be for us because we're going to have to leave. So we'd rather not have that. Actually, we'd rather like keep what we have because we at least know we're going to be able to live here. So we're really trying to figure out and work with others around like, how do we make sure that people who want to stay in our communities are able to do so? And how do we kind of push forward on that and recognize that we are an 85% black city, and it's crazy when you drive into certain places, and when you drive around Detroit, you have to remind yourself it's 85% black. It's 85% black. So if you drive anywhere that has a bunch of white people in it, you got to remind yourself it's 85% black. Why is that? Because there's this micro segregation that happens within our different neighborhoods. I mean, we serve Pingree Park, Island View, Indian Village, and West Village in our zip code. A very diverse zip code that is experiencing this micro segregation happening. And so what we're trying to do is create businesses, for one, that can bring everyone together, but also try to like be a change agent within those other communities to show like, hey, how are we thinking about our neighbors getting pushed out here?
So can I just say one thing?
Last word.
I'll make it so quick. I think it goes to the question that you raised around transforming systems and the question you raised around gentrification, which, you know, I'm trained by Grace Lee Boggs, the late Grace Lee Boggs, and and this sounds like so woo sometimes, but it grounds me in the sense that if I transform myself, I transform the world around me. And that brings me to one of the biggest questions that has guided the work that we do, which is what can the role of media and technology be in building a new economy based in mutual aid? And I think that question will be the case for a very long time because we have yet to understand business models that know how to build mutual aid. I'm not talking about social enterprises. I'm talking about straight up mutual aid. I cannot organize telecoms within my city because of a bottom line that drives people. And so I think there needs to be a fundamental transformation in the way we think about each other and the way we build our relationships with each other to truly understand what mutual aid looks like at scale.
Thank you. That's a great note to end on. Let's hear it for our beautiful panel. And thank you all for being a beautiful audience. MichiganHouse.org, you can find links to all of their projects there. And let me ask you one question. What's the greatest nation in the world? That's right, donation. So you can support these people, and it's a little same we have in Detroit. So please support these people, get to know more about their projects, and thank you for being here at Michigan House.